Hi guys, so today we're going to do some prep work and we're going to go ahead and get started with our first kind of activity for our first big project. So I could take a picture like this where I'm zoomed way out and I've got all this empty dead space around my object. That's not a good plan. Or I could zoom in so close it's out of focus and I don't even see the whole object. I could see the whole object, but from an angle that doesn't make any sense and makes it hard to draw three-dimensionally. Or I can show the whole object with very little extra space around the outside at a slightly turned angle so I could kind of see it more three-dimensionally. You know, it's got an X, Y, and a Z axis that are easy to understand in this shape. So now I want you guys to pause, well, I'll pause for you unless you're watching this offline, and go take a picture of a simple object in your house. Think about all the things I talked about, and when you get back, I want you to upload that picture to Google Classroom. So here I'm going to take my picture of a lemon, and you can work off your phone. But I'm going to use the actual picture, and I'm going to focus on the axis going here and the axis going here. So I've got the long axis and the short axis. And that's basically from the furthest points in either direction. And I'm going to actually use my pencil to just measure those. And I'm seeing that I've got 1 to about 1 1/4 as my proportion. So if I was to measure it directly, I would just go 1 of these and then 1 1/4. Now if I was using a much bigger paper or if I'm working off my phone, I'm going to have to scale that up. So whatever I choose for my 1, I'll use something bigger, and that'll make my 1 1/4 equally and proportionally bigger to fit the paper. If I don't want to draw a little lemon on a big paper, it's okay right now because I'm using a smaller paper. So I'm going to notice that that nub on the lemon kind of is that quarter and draw the big shape. When I'm drawing this lemon shape, I'm looking for straight lines that I can then turn into curves because if I do that as opposed to just using an arc of a circle, if I look for straight lines and turn them into curves, I'll get more complex and realistic curves. Just using the arc of a circle is probably not going to help me get the shape of this lemon. Adding some shading, that'll help define some form. Whenever you see shading, it helps you understand that light is hitting different parts of an object differently, which also helps you understand that that object's three-dimensional. Here I go drawing some cross contour lines just straight through the actual object, like a wire mesh. I'm not worried too much because, of course, this is painting class, so a lot of this stuff is going to get painted over. Right now I'm just trying to find the form and understand the form the best I can. Trying to relate it to the table, so I'm going to use some shading to kind of show that. One nice thing about that is now that bottom line is almost disappeared. Instead I'm using a dark shape next to a light shape. That's really important because when we're using paint, I don't want outlines on anything. I just want you to use different colors and different shades to show the differences between objects. There are very few lines in real life. Adding some of the texture with a little bit of stippling. I'm not going to go too crazy on this because, again, I'm going to come back and paint over this. Just trying to get an understanding of the object. It's not going to be precious. Adding some of the blemishes. Deepening some shading. Finding, where that middle shadow is. I'm observing more that there's this middle shadow that runs down here and then kind of a core shadow near that nub. Adding a little more texture. noticed that something was wrong up here. It seems too pointy on the back end. It should be more squared off, and I don't know if what I just did there even fixed it all the way. I think the top kind of comes around too quickly. So I'm erasing these high lines so that the areas in light can kind of disappear into the background a little bit. It helps them, it helps give dimension by having a different line weight. You could still see the line, but now that it's a light line, it helps us understand the atmosphere. Like there's, more light up there, and then the heavier, darker area down at the bottom defines it a little more. And some finishing touches here. Again, it's not perfect, but I don't want to be too precious because I'm going to paint over this at some point. Okay, and I notice there's a little light reflecting up off the table. That's what that last little erasing was doing under the shadow. Now you guys are going to draw your object. You're just going to use regular pencil on white paper. I'll be here. You've got 5 minutes. If you need anything, just kind of jump back on and talk to me. So now you guys are going to create your own still life. Gather together 5 objects and think about those objects. They could be interesting. They could tell some kind of a story. Let's say I knew someone who was a photographer. I could get together a whole bunch of cameras and stuff and take that still life and make it almost a portrait of that person without even using that person's image. I could also think about the shape and the size and the color of those things and how they might tell a story. One thing might be left out, or it might seem isolated, or you might change the background to make that thing seem highlighted, almost like celebrated. And it doesn't have to be specific things. You could just be playing with color and shape and size. I could have a bunch of tall things and one short thing and kind of tell a story that way. Or I could have a cowboy boots and a rope and a horseshoe and tell a story that way. There's a lot of different things you could do to tell a story. You need at least 5 different objects. You want to have different heights. You want to have different textures. You want to have different colors. And they should all be kind of different objects. You also want to have some depth in your image where when you're doing it, there are things in front of other things. There might be some overlap. You might have them going further back into space. So I took this picture. It's got 6 objects, so that's at least 5. They're different heights. They go back in space. But when I look, I've got all this empty space around the whole thing. And that's not good. That means that all that space is just empty, wasted space that isn't important in my painting. One thing I want to consider is the rule of thirds. And if I divide my picture into thirds lengthwise and vertically, then I can see these points where those lines cross. And I want to think about how can I arrange some of my objects on those different points. How can I use those points to create visual interest? Here I've tried a different angle, also zoomed in. Things are going out of the picture plane, but I've still got that object smack dab in the middle. Now I've arranged the objects so they kind of align on the thirds more. Think about how those interesting points could be altered just by editing the picture. Maybe if I crop the picture, I could move into the rule of thirds more. And here you'll see that the whole middle of the picture is mostly empty, with all the outside stuff mostly aligning on the rule of thirds points. Another thing I mentioned was having things go out of the picture plane. When things leave the picture plane, it helps us imagine that they're part of a larger world. It expands our understanding of what kind of universe those objects exist in, as opposed to just imagining just the objects with empty space around them in isolation. In the long run, I think I'm going to end up using this picture. It's got a lot of objects that kind of align with the rule of thirds. It's got great depth, visual interest. It's moving through space in an interesting way. I've got a lot of different textures, and I've got print on it that I can try and work on, which will be a challenge for me. But I think this is the picture that I'm going to use. When you go take your pictures right now, remember to take lots of pictures. Different angles, different arrangements, different objects even. You will only turn in 3, but you're not going to get 3 great pictures by taking only 3 pictures. Spend some time, investigate, explore, and come up with some really great pictures because you're going to be drawing and painting this thing for quite a while.